is an old hackneyed subject on which there are very pronounced views, some holding that they can never meet, and some less pessimistic, hoping to find some common grounds for a dialogue. If dialogues between the Eastern and the Western cultures have not proved very fruitful, it is because of want of enough sincerity on the part of the involved parties. Now, we are not concerned at the moment with the meeting of the Eastern and Western cultures, but with a possible synthesis between Eastern thought and Western thought. You might say this is a field for philosophers and thinkers, and what have we got to do with it as students and teachers of the Center of Education here? The theme has become topical for everyone living in Pondicherry, and particularly for members of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, those who are studying in the educational center, because a central university of Pondicherry, which is being established, has for its important segment a Sri Aurobindo school for Eastern and Western studies. Lately, the momentum for starting this school is gaining ground, and as a preliminary, they had last month a national seminar in which some 25 to 30 eminent professors, teachers of philosophy from all over India participated. The subject being synthesis between the Eastern and the Western thought. I happened to be present at the inaugural function, and I was unpleasantly surprised at the note struck by the chief guest, who was the Vice Chancellor of one of the universities in South India and who had been specially called as a prominent educationist and philosopher to inaugurate this seminar. He sounded a very negative note and a highly patronizing tone to the effect that people who talk of Eastern thought do not know what they are talking. He said they are thinking Eastern thought is Indian thought. They don't know anything about Chinese thought, about Japanese, the Tibetan, and so on. And he said, it can never be that these streams of thought can be combined with those in the West, because each one has its own individuality. And so he went on. I lost interest at some stage and I didn't pursue the discussion further. But the point I would like to make is that whether it is Eastern, Japanese or Chinese or Tibetan thought, they are all essentially derived, influenced by the Indian thought. It is scholars from Tibet who came to India, studied in universities like the Nagarjuna and other universities, Nalanda universities, and took back tomes of scriptures, philosophies. And these philosophies underwent modifications in terms of the temperament, the climate, and this life outlook of the peoples north. And there is not a single concept in the Chinese or the Tibetan philosophy which cannot be traced to Indian thought. Sri Aurobindo observes, I believe, in the Renaissance of India, that there is not a single major concept in the Western thought, particularly the European, which has not been adumbrated in the Upanishadic and the Vedic thought of India. Adumbrated, mind you, originally the seeds are there. The seeds have been thrown and they have been developed in different climes and different peoples according to their genius. Now, secondly, when we speak of synthesis, we do not speak of a unification obliterating the specialities of each constituent. Nor do we think of an eclectic get-together, which means you select one element from here, one element from there, and put together and say here is a unified thought. Something like Akbar tried when he wanted to have a universal religion. It is called eclectic religion, eclectic thought, which cannot be a living thought. It can be only an academic exercise. With this background, we will now come to the question of what are the possibilities of Eastern and Western thought joining together to initiate a movement for a world thought. A world thought, like world unity, is something that is there somewhere on the subtler planes, as Mother puts it, but waiting for the right conditions to emerge on the physical plane. Now, any thought, particularly the kind of thought that we are considering, high thought, cannot rise in a vacuum, whether it is Eastern thought or Western thought. They have a background, a soil from which they sprout. And all over the world, religion, occultism, philosophy, spirituality, mysticism, these are the main causative factors for the rise and the development of any serious thought. It is so all over the world. Everywhere, religion begins when the primitive man, who is face to face with nature, inclement nature in those days, in those ages, with his mind governed by a kind of instinctive or half-intuitive mentality, he senses the presence of certain unseen powers in the cosmos. He is face to face with the realities of nature. He has to survive. He has to safeguard his own family, his own interests. But everywhere there is a hostile environment, an inclement situation. And he feels that behind all the natural phenomena, there are certain supernatural powers, forces that govern these phenomena. Behind rain, there is a power that controls rain. Behind storm, there is another power or a presence. And these powers or presences, he is led to call deities or gods. And the society consisting of these people, they develop means of communication with these gods. You may call them elemental beings today or whatever. And the elders of the society develop means of communication with these powers, to supplicate them, to flatter them, to seek their favors, to ward off dangers. And everywhere, this institution of religion, establishing a bridge between the humans and the divine or the supernatural powers, is organized around an institution of sacrifice. Sacrifice in which men pour themselves, maybe in fear, maybe in awe, maybe in adoration, to the higher powers. And a religion develops to link man back to God. That's the original meaning of religion, as you all know. And gradually, the priest who develops these ways, who is in charge of these religious paraphernalia, they gather other items of worship, not merely incantations, but they develop means of propitiating the gods in their own lives, so that the society, general society, may benefit from them. They become the mages, the priests, the rishis, the mystics of each society. So there is a kind of partnership established between those on earth and those who are supposed to be in heaven. Gradually, the ceremonials of worship, the techniques of incantation, these become more and more technical. And the elders of the society go behind the surfaces and probe into the secrets of nature, not only in order to propitiate the powers, but also to control the powers, to establish a control over all these agencies. And that's the beginning of this occultism. Occultism is a science, a technique of probing into the secrets of nature, acquiring control over the powers of nature, learning to bring to bear on the physical plane the laws and regulations that properly belong to the supraphysical planes. That is how occultism develops. And our modern science is the first exercise in occultism in modern days. Because this science, modern science, has probed into the secrets of physical nature, acquired control over certain forces, certain energies, linked them to the human life, and enriched the human existence or the earthly life. Occultism proper is only an extension of bringing together the physical and the supraphysical domains of existence. Some societies overdevelop this science of occultism. They are fascinated, they are attracted by the possibilities of control by a few people through the exercise of supernatural powers over large sections of humanity. Control over nature, control over physical happenings, and they specialize in what is called occultism. A new class springs up. They have their own science, they have their own scriptures, they have their own literature. And certain countries like Egypt, some of the old Mediterranean countries, some of the South American countries, they developed this occult science to an enormous extent. And some civilizations, like the famous Atlantis and Lemuria, who developed occult science and occult knowledge to an immeasurable extent at the cost of other aspects of life. They sank under the weight of occultism. That is by the way. So occultism is a development from religion. As occultism develops, there is also a seeking in the human mind, the human being essentially a mental being, wanting to know the justifications of reason, rational explanations for what religion says, for what occultism testifies. And they study the principles, the processes of functionings in nature, the fundamentals of existence, the aim of life, the goal of life. They apply their mind, and philosophies spring up. Each society has its own way, starting point, the way of looking at things, and different philosophies come up. Now, as long as these philosophies keep close to the roots of religion, the roots of life, they are healthy and invigorating. But when they step beyond their legitimate bounds and concern themselves only with the fundamental principles and not with the application, not with the processes of things, they are called metaphysics. Metaphysics, speculation, totally divorced from the facts of life. This preoccupation with metaphysics, with intellectual weavings or speculations of philosophies, gradually brings a reaction. What have we got to do with philosophy which does not better our life? What have we got to do with this knowledge which is top heavy, which doesn't enrich our life? There are high philosophies speaking of unity of God and nature, unity of life, but unless you have the way to translate it into practice, it remains dry philosophy. So this urgency of sharing the concepts of philosophy in life leads to the movement of spirituality, where one digs deeper into oneself or probes deeper into the surface existence around for more stable realities behind the flux of change. What is there eternal? What is there beyond the space and time? These questions, and they are utilized to broaden our consciousness, heighten our consciousness, and rise above the hold of nature, ushering in the rule of supernature, the higher nature, whether you call it God or divine or whatever it is. Something higher than what has been realized. That leads to spirituality. Spirituality keeps close to life. It enlivens life, beautifies life, and gives meaning to every detail of life, as long as it is real spiritual life. There are all along those, whether at the stage of religion, stage of occultism, stage of philosophy, stage of spirituality, who gain access to the fundamentals of each approach, apply them in their own personal life, and exalt themselves above the humdrum existence. And they establish personal communion with God, with higher powers, and live altogether a life of inner dimension. Outwardly they may appear to be like anybody else, but they have an inner dimension when they live aloof, but all the same radiate certain vibrations which emanate peace, which emanate harmony, which emanate love. And whatever they believe, whatever they perceive, if they formulate, they do not care to establish them according to the standards of logic and reason. For them, those facts are self-evident. Consciousness is their witness, not logic or reasoning. Now, these are called mystics. Mystics are those who have a personal spiritual life, who have an inner communion with the higher powers. And there are different kinds of mystics. There are certain mystics who perceive great beauty, great harmony in nature, and they adore divinity in nature. They are called natural mystics. There are those who feel oneness in life, God in everyone, their own identification with God in the world. They are contemplative mystics. There are others who have a personal relation of servant to the master, of a lover to the beloved, of friend, a personal relation with God. They are called the personal mysticism. It is called personal mysticism. So these are 3 or 4 different brands of mysticism. Now, higher thought in every society draws from all these 4 fields, soils, where this thought is very identified with religious dogma, religious beliefs, religious superstitions. We call it theological philosophy. Very much as what is passes for philosophy in the Christian institutions in India, theology. Then there is a thought which is closely related to occultism. And there we call it in India Gupta Vidya, occult science and occult knowledge. And which are purely academic, they are called philosophies. And these philosophies have different backgrounds. In the East, at any rate in India, which is the soul of the East, experience is prior, philosophy is subsequent. First, there has to be a spiritual experience in consciousness. And that experience is presented in terms of the intellect, in terms of mind, and that becomes philosophy. In India, Sri Aurobindo points out, nobody could claim to be a philosopher, could claim to have an original philosophy, unless he based his philosophy on experience. Not just experience. I may say I have this experience, and you will tell me it is only a subjective experience, true to you perhaps, but not true to us. But no, it should be a verifiable experience. If my experience is verified by you, on conditions which I apply to myself, then that is true experience, and that gives me the right to formulate that experience in terms of intellect, and that becomes a darshana, a philosophy. An Indian philosophy is not a tarka. Tarka, argument, reasoning, dialectics. Indian tradition does not admit that as real philosophy. It is darshana. Darshana is a vision, a revelation, a thing that he sees. When I see a divine revelation and experience it and can communicate it to others, that is darshan. That is why Indian philosophies are known as darshanas, not as metaphysical systems, though later on in the classical age, these dialectics developed. But even there, whether it's the dialectics of Shankara or Ramanuja or Madhva, they base themselves on a certain experience. And each experience is different. Now, how do you synthesize these experiences? Shankara will say that your soul unites with Brahman. Ramanuja will say you cannot unite. There has to be always a distinction. You can be in the proximity of God. You can have a relationship with God. But you can't unite with God. They are two different categories. Madhva will come and say, not only man and God are two different categories, nature is the third category. And man can only be a dasa, a servant, a servitor of God. He can never unite, and he can never even be in the close proximity of God. Now these are dialectics, and on the plane of dialectics, on the plane of reasoning, they cannot be synthesized. So this is a difficulty. When you seek to synthesize philosophies, or whether in the East or the West, the synthesis cannot be effected on the level of mind, on the level of mental reason. In the West, as I said, spiritual experience was never the essential requirement of a philosophy. They had perceptions, they had visions, and they wove philosophies, possible philosophies. And it was quite different from the lifestyle of peoples. But in keeping with the time spirit of the age in this century, which is pressing for unification, which is pressing for synthesis, which is pressing for unity, the Western mind has come to recognize that all these separate philosophies and separate approaches are partial truths. We have to get them together in a kind of a holistic spirit, a holistic vision, and organize them around a central truth. So the Western thought climate today is more holistic than individualistic. In the East also, the time has come to revise our stand, because the old world-rejecting ascetic spirituality, which rejected the world as of no consequence and always sought to retire into the deeper depths of the higher heights, that has given place to what I would call an affirmative spirituality, of which Sri Aurobindo was the first pioneer in the present century. None did it before. There may have been affirmative spiritualities in the Vedic age 5,000 years ago. But in modern times, it was Sri Aurobindo and the Mother who in the beginning of the century gave this goal of affirmative spirituality, perfection of life, manifestation of God on earth, sharing God with all on earth, kingdom of God on earth. So this, at that time it was a lone voice, but gradually we see all world thought tending in this direction, whether it is Teilhard de Chardin, who spoke of a new step in evolution, or other thinkers who speak of spiritual pragmatism and other ways, still they have come to recognize that it has to be integrative. Just as the well-being and health of man, when I speak of man, I speak of the human, necessitates an integration of the various faculties, integration of his various activities around a central truth at its core. Similarly, a world thought also has to integrate itself, and the time is now when the need is felt for an integralization of the various streams of thought all over the world. And what is the core? What is the center around which this integralization has to take place? That is still a matter of debate. I have had occasions to participate in some of these conferences in the West, and to my great dismay I found that all those representatives of Western thoughts, cultures, countries, they had Christianity, return to the Christ, return to the Christian teaching. There is the solution. For them, Eastern thought doesn't exist. At best, they will say some Hindu thought. But what Hindu thought means, they do not know. But today, there are various facilities in the various universities in Europe and America to acquaint the Western mind with the Eastern thought, with the rich promise of Eastern thought towards a world thought. And it is being gradually assimilated. Unfortunately, as genuine Indian thought, which was being introduced and which was introduced to the West by Swami Vivekananda, reinforced in the talks of Swami Ramtirth, underlined to a certain great extent by Swami Yoganand, who was the founder of the Self-Realization Fellowship of Kriya Yoga, it fell into wrong hands, pseudos, and things took a wrong turn. But with the presentation of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, particularly by Spiegelberg and those of his line of thinking, and a number of devotees in the different parts of America espousing Sri Aurobindo's spirituality, integral philosophy, there was an awakening. And it looked as if America would choose Sri Aurobindo's way. But as many movements rise and fall, rise and decay, rise and weaken, whatever the reasons and explanations, today there is a certain downplaying of this thought in America. Various causes have contributed to it. Various influences, misrepresentations, wrong readings, presented as genuine readings from our own place, may be associated with the ashram, may be associated with Auroville or their sympathizers. They have made the whole situation very grotesque, and they robbed the potential. This obtains also to a great extent in Europe. I have seen with consternation the squabbles, the claims to have better ashrams, better centers of education, better music than Sunil's in Germany, things somewhere else in other countries. Everywhere there are the pseudos. Of course, pseudos can't reign for all time, and we believe that the truth will shine, will come up, but we should be prepared. Whatever the bleak prospects today in the West for Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and vision, and hold on life, and Mother's stress on perfection of life, we have to be prepared to build this ideal in our personal lives. Whatever failure has been outside is because there are not enough examples of building this vision in our personal lives. We have to establish ourselves, not to get public acceptance, but in the eyes of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, to say that these are living vehicles of our truth. Nobody can resist. A few individuals who have realized the truth, established the truth, and recast their life in the pattern of the new ideal, they are enough messengers, enough weak messengers of light. And there is a great contribution that we can make towards this unification of Eastern and Western thought. As I mentioned in my address to the seminar, Sri Aurobindo is the one seer who provides all the basics for the synthesis of the different streams of life. He rejects nothing. He does not make light of any contribution in the field of philosophy or spirituality or religion or occultism. He gives its due place to everything. Coming back to the dialectics which I mentioned illustratively of Shankara, Ramanuja and Madhva, you can't solve this on the intellectual plane. But he points out that on the level of consciousness, these distinctions do not obtain. It is possible for me, for one, at the deepest level, to unite the soul with the divine. The soul becomes part of the divine. It may be function as a center or a ray, but it joins. There is the union of Atma and Paramatma. But nearing the surface level, on the level of nature, it is possible for the soul, as associated with nature, to have relationship with God, to play with God, to play with Krishna. Deep inside there may be unity, but at the level of nature, there it is possible to have a relationship. One does not negate the other, one does not cancel the other. And still further in the external life, the compartmentalization of nature, man and God can be experienced, can be enjoyed, and the soul can enjoy its status of servitude to God. What does this show? This shows that problems which are raised by the intellect, which are raised by logical reasoning, and which cannot be solved on the level of the mind, on the level of the intellect, can be solved at the level of consciousness. So it is only a discipline and a science of consciousness that can truly synthesize, show the way towards synthesizing the different philosophies, the different religions, the different thoughts, all true in their own way, playing their right part. Nature had an intention in developing each in its own milieu. But in the world unity, in the world thought, a world life which is one, all these have to be put in their respective places, and we have to understand what they do, how they relate to each other. And this can be done only in a science of consciousness. Time was when Western philosophers spoke of psychology. Then when they saw that truth can't be bound within the bounds of psychology, they spoke of parapsychology. Now they speak of metapsychology. Ultimately they will find that life cannot be cabined even in metapsychology. It is only in the science of consciousness. And the science of consciousness is not just theory, it is vague and unreal unless it is experience. Consciousness is an experience concept, not a mental concept. You have to experience it. And when you experience it, you don't need proof. So we are stepping into an age of a consciousness which is higher than the mind, but which contains the mind, which does not reject the mind, which recognizes the services and role of mind. And it is the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and Mother is precisely this yoga of consciousness. And this yoga of consciousness is not confined to the top intellectuals or scientists, but even it can be shared and taught and learnt by children, because there is a level at which children can learn of consciousness. The terminology has to be different. We don't speak that it is consciousness. You may speak of feeling, you may speak of thought. And in their original innocence, unclouded by logical concepts, it goes home when you relate the truth of consciousness to everyday life. So the key to synthesis of Eastern and Western thought is there, provided by nature, provided by God, and that is in the realm, in the domain of consciousness. And to learn that, to teach that, to practice that is our aim and objective in staying here in Mother's ashram. Thank you.